The Middle East, a region synonymous with volatility, is once again teetering on the precipice of chaos. The collapse of the Assad regime in Syria has sent shockwaves across the region. This seismic shift has created a dangerous power vacuum, with various factions vying for control. Israel, perpetually wary of its volatile neighborhood, watches with growing trepidation. The disintegration of Syria presents a direct threat to Israel's national security. Extremist groups exploiting the chaos is a nightmare scenario Israel is determined to prevent. The Syrian conflict has entered a new and even more perilous phase. The potential for this conflict to escalate into a wider regional conflagration looms large. The world watches with bated breath as the battle for Syria rages on. The stakes have been raised even further by the collapse of the Assad regime. Israel, a nation forged in the crucible of conflict, has long viewed its security through the lens of existential threats. Surrounded by hostile neighbors and burdened by the bitter legacy of past wars, Israel has developed a security doctrine centered on preemption and a willingness to act unilaterally to protect its interests. The collapse of the Assad regime and the ensuing chaos in Syria have only served to amplify these pre-existing security concerns. The potential for Syria to become a haven for extremist groups, some with ties to Iran, is a threat that Israel takes very seriously. The Golan Heights, a strategic plateau captured by Israel from Syria in the 1967 Six-Day War, has become a focal point of these heightened tensions. The presence of Iranian-backed militias, such as Hezbollah, operating in southern Syria, poses a direct threat to Israeli communities in the Golan Heights and beyond. Israel has repeatedly stated that it will not tolerate the presence of Iranian-backed forces in southern Syria, and has launched numerous airstrikes against suspected Iranian targets within Syria. These strikes, while intended to degrade Iranian capabilities and deter further entrenchment, risk sparking a wider conflict, drawing Israel into the Syrian quagmire. The Syrian civil war, now in its second decade, has become a tragic and complex tapestry of interwoven conflicts, with regional and global powers using the Syrian battlefield to pursue their own interests. This proxy war has further complicated an already intractable conflict, making a peaceful resolution even more elusive. Russia's military intervention in 2015, at the behest of the embattled Assad regime, tilted the balance of power in favor of the Syrian government and its allies. Russia's presence in Syria, however, has also brought it into close proximity with Israeli forces operating in the same airspace, increasing the risk of miscalculation or accidental escalation. Turkey, another regional power with a vested interest in the Syrian conflict, has launched military incursions into northern Syria, targeting Kurdish groups that it considers a threat to its national security. These incursions have further complicated the situation, creating new fronts in an already multi-sided conflict. The United States, while officially committed to a political solution to the Syrian crisis, has maintained a military presence in eastern Syria, ostensibly to combat remnants of the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, or ISIS. This presence, however, has also been seen as a way to counter Iranian influence in the region, further fueling the proxy war dynamic. The international community, deeply divided over the Syrian conflict from its outset, has struggled to formulate a coherent and effective response to the latest developments. The collapse of the Assad regime, while welcomed by some as a long-overdue end to a brutal dictatorship, has also raised fears of further instability and bloodshed. The United Nations Security Council, paralyzed by divisions among its permanent members, has been unable to pass meaningful resolutions to address the crisis. Russia, a staunch ally of the Assad regime, has repeatedly used its veto power to block resolutions critical of the Syrian government. The United States and its Western allies, while condemning the Assad regime's human rights abuses, have been reluctant to intervene militarily in the conflict, fearing a repeat of the Iraq War debacle. This reluctance to intervene has been criticized by some as emboldening the Assad regime and its allies. The Syrian people, caught in the crossfire of this geopolitical chess game, have borne the brunt of the suffering. Millions have been displaced from their homes, seeking refuge in neighboring countries or further afield. The humanitarian crisis, already dire, has been exacerbated by the recent escalation in fighting. Section 5. The human cost of intervention. The Syrian people, trapped in a seemingly endless cycle of violence and displacement, have paid the heaviest price for the failure to find a peaceful resolution to the conflict. The collapse of the Assad regime, while offering a glimmer of hope for an end to decades of authoritarian rule, has also brought with it new dangers and uncertainties. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, a UK-based monitoring group, estimates that over 500,000 people have been killed in the Syrian conflict since it began in 2011. The true death toll, however, is likely much higher, as many deaths go unrecorded amid the chaos and destruction. The conflict has displaced more than half of Syria's pre-war population of 22 million, creating one of the worst humanitarian crises in recent history. Millions of Syrians have fled to neighboring countries, such as Lebanon, Jordan, and Turkey, straining resources and fueling social tensions. The international community, while pledging billions of dollars in humanitarian aid, has failed to adequately address the scale of the suffering. The Syrian people, many of whom have lost everything, face an uncertain future, their lives shattered by a conflict that shows no signs of abating. Section 6. The geopolitical chessboard shifting alliances and regional dynamics. The Syrian conflict has reshaped alliances and redrawn the map of the Middle East. Old rivalries have intensified and new partnerships have emerged. Russia's intervention in Syria marked a turning point, signaling Moscow's return as a major player. Russia's support for Assad has expanded its influence in the eastern Mediterranean. Iran has used the conflict to further its regional ambitions. The IRGC and Hezbollah have gained valuable experience and influence. Turkey has shifted focus to countering Kurdish groups in northern Syria. Turkey's incursions have established a buffer zone along its border. Section 7. The specter of escalation. The Syrian conflict, already a complex and multi-layered war, is teetering on the brink of a wider regional conflagration. The presence of multiple foreign powers, each pursuing their own interests, has created a volatile and unpredictable environment where even a minor miscalculation could have catastrophic consequences. Israel's repeated airstrikes against Iranian targets in Syria, while intended to deter Iranian entrenchment, risk provoking a direct confrontation with Iran or its proxies, such as Hezbollah. Iran, for its part, has vowed to retaliate against any Israeli attack on its forces or interests in Syria. Turkey's military operations in northern Syria, targeting Kurdish groups aligned with the United States, have also raised tensions with Washington. The risk of an accidental clash between Turkish and American forces, while low, cannot be discounted. The presence of Russian air defense systems in Syria, such as the S-400, adds another layer of complexity to the situation. The accidental targeting of a Russian aircraft by any of the parties involved could trigger a chain of events leading to a wider conflict. Section 8. The uncertain future of Syria and the region. The future of Syria, once a proud and ancient nation, hangs precariously in the balance. The collapse of the Assad regime, while marking a watershed moment in the country's history, has done little to quell the violence or pave the way for a lasting peace. The country remains fragmented, with the Syrian government, various rebel groups, and foreign powers all vying for control. The Syrian people, exhausted by years of war and displacement, face an uncertain future, their hopes for a better life dashed by the ongoing conflict. The international community, deeply divided over how to resolve the crisis, has failed to provide the Syrian people with the assistance and protection they desperately need. The United Nations, hamstrung by divisions among its member states, has been unable to broker a political solution or end the bloodshed. The Syrian conflict, now in its 11th year, shows no signs of abating. The specter of further violence, instability, and humanitarian suffering looms large over the region. The international community, if it is to avert an even greater catastrophe, must find the political will to end the fighting and help the Syrian people rebuild their shattered lives.